Thad Brown and Carl Jones back with you again today. We are talking about first round running backs and interior offensive line. We want to get into that a little bit too. A couple of other, priorities potentially for the Bills this year in the draft. I'm going to start with the running backs because, well, it's more fun, of course. And look, Carl, I think when you look at this running back class, there isn't really a guy that stands out to me as a solid, legitimate first round candidate. And I'll tell you what, in the current NFL, that may not be the case any year, going forward, outside of like the super elite, the Saquon Barkleys, the kind of the Adrian Peterson old school. You got to have someone who is off the charts good to be able to justify a first round pick. Last year, I thought we had a pretty good crop of running backs with Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, or I'm sorry, this is 2 years ago. Taylor and Swift and Edwards-Helaire, and only had one of those guys going round one, and it was the last pick of round one. So, now last year, Travis Etienne went, Najee Harris went. I think there's good reasons to argue both of those guys are potentially game-breaking talents. So let's start out with the obvious question. Is there a guy, in your opinion, in this year's draft that would qualify in the Najee, Etienne? Yes, if you spend a first-round pick on him, you can kind of justify a category.
No, I wouldn't say so. For me, if you're going to be a first-round caliber running back, you got to be good in all of the phases. And what I mean by that, you got to be electric with the ball in your hands first and foremost. So that's the obvious. But then in this new days and NFL where the passing game has exploded, you got to be able to play on third down in both capacities, either catching the ball out of the backfield or being able to pass protect. And if you can't do all of those at a good level, then you're a sub-package running back. And what's the point of spending a first-round pick on you? So in my eyes, I don't believe that any of the backs in this class can do all of those at a good level compared to where Etienne and Najee were able to do so at the collegiate level. Obviously, it translated for Najee in the league, and hopefully the same for Etienne as well. But no, in my eyes, there's two guys that stand out from the rest of the pack in this class, but neither of those guys possess those same qualities from the previous years.
All right, let's talk about the class. And you and I talked about this a little bit last night. We both, I think, have Breece Hall as the number one back in this class. And, he's a guy to me. He looks on film like Derrick Henry, even though I'm like, well, is he really as big as Derrick Henry? And he's not. Henry's 6'3", Hall's only, figure quote, 6'1". I mean, still a bigger guy for a running back. He's a really patient runner. I like Hall a lot because this is a guy that doesn't get out of control. When you give him the ball, it doesn't look like he's ever worried about where he's going to go with it. He's got the ability to, find a good spot. He's a smooth accelerator, but he gets at the top speed pretty quick. Got a 4.39 40, so he's got some breakaway speed. I think this is a guy that can be, a potential every down star. I'm just not confident he'll get there. Fumbles were an issue with him, but let's confirm: is Hall your number one guy?
For me, he's my number one guy for the reason I alluded to earlier, just because I don't think he's as good as of a runner that my other guy is. But considering that I do have confidence with him playing on third down as opposed to the other guy, that will have me put Breece Hall a little bit ahead of him in that regard. Just for the same reason you said, he is a smooth runner, sometimes too smooth to a certain extent. You kind of are wondering, is he being a little patient or too lackadaisical out there? But, I mean, there's guys in the league that have succeeded with that style. I mean, Le'Veon Bell is the first guy that comes to mind. So I have confidence that he'll be able to translate to the league. And he was productive in college, and I don't see why he wouldn't be able to do so in the league as well.
See, Breece Hall to me is not Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell almost came to a stop and was like, all right, I'm going to wait and see what happens. Whereas, again, the thing for Hall with me was that it never looks like he's uncomfortable. It never looks like he's unsure. He's just a confident runner, and, you talked about this with defensive backs. When I asked you, what do you look at in a defensive back that makes you confident this guy can play at the next level? And you talked about the fact that, he's never worried. He never looks worried. He's always, kind of under control. Breece Hall is a run in a position where it's hard to be under control all the time. Breece Hall's that guy, so that's what I like best about him. You talked about the fact he can be a third down guy. He's a solid receiver. The one thing about him as a receiver, he didn't really run many routes. This is not a guy that you can like split out wide and, give him a route tree. He was kind of, essentially his routes were run to the sideline and stand there, or release out of the backfield underneath, and we might dump the ball to you. So I think there's certainly more to be desired there. And there's a question with him in terms of being a fumbler. If the Bills went with him round one, I would be bothered by that. That would be, too high a pick as far as I'm concerned. I think there's better options there at corner and receiver, among other positions. I know he's been mocked to the Bills a little bit in round number 1. How reasonable a first round pick do you think he is?
I don't see it at all. And in the most respectful way possible, when I think of a first round back, he's not the guy that comes to mind. And I know he's had a really, really productive college career. I mean, the stat that comes to mind is 24 games in a row with a touchdown. That's not like fluke. Like there's certain guys who just have a knack for the end zone, and he's clearly one of those guys. I just don't know if his all-around skill set or his explosiveness or the things that make him elite is comparable to a CMC, or is comparable to a Jonathan Taylor, or is comparable to the upper echelon of guys. And that's why I don't feel comfortable at 25. And like we talked about before with previous draft position groups, if I'm going to take you that high at a position where I can maybe go a little bit lower in the draft and find a guy that's comparable, I need a trait that's elite, or that is one of one to a certain extent. I don't know if he has that one of one trait that is so great that I couldn't find it in rounds 2, 3, or 4. So I think he's a really solid back. And if they made that same decision in round 2, I'll be all for it. Just 25, I'm not too confident with it.
All right. After Breece Hall, I think the other two top guys, the guys who kind of separated themselves from the rest of the pack, are Kenneth Walker from Michigan State and Isaiah Spiller from A&M. And, I know you were alluding to a guy who you thought was a better runner than Hall. I'm going to assume Kenneth Walker's that guy. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, he looks like he's playing video games out there half the time when he has the ball in his hands. I mean, you want to talk about a guy who makes his O-line right. He does that all the time at Michigan State. And in the Big Ten, where the boxes are a little bit heavier because the passing games aren't as electric as they are in other conferences, he made his O-line right a lot. I mean, there's a lot of times where he makes jump cuts because there's a guy in his face 3 yards in the backfield, and he somehow turns a negative 3-yard play into, 4 or 5 yards down the field. I think he's really, really electric when he has the ball in his hands. It's just that in the age of 2022, you better be an elite guy with the ball in your hands in terms of running, like a Derrick Henry, if you're not going to be able to contribute in the passing game. And I've seen some stuff where he may not be the best in pass pro, which is a no-no. Like in the league, you have to be able to protect that $1 million quarterback back there. And then also, as we all know, you have to contribute in some way, shape, or form in the passing game when it comes to catching it. And you alluded to it last night, which is a stat that I didn't know about his pass catching skills, which is kind of alarming, to say the least.
Yeah, Kenneth Walker, 32 career games. Now, to be fair, he started at Wake, played 2 years at Wake, and then transferred to Michigan State for last year, and wasn't as much a feature back at Wake as he was at Michigan State last season. But he played 32 career college games, has 19 total receptions in all of those games. So averaging less than 1 catch a game with at least 1 full season of being a, featured back. And even at Wake, even though he might not have been the featured guy, he got plenty of touches. So it wasn't like this is an afterthought player, when he was at Wake Forest. And on top of that, yeah, I did not like him as a pass blocker at all. So right now he's going to walk into the NFL as a guy who is only a first and second round back. I liked him a lot. I'm with you. I think as a runner, I don't know if I got him better than Breece Hall, but I do think Walker is a really good runner, really elusive, always kept his feet moving. And, the thing I look for is when you get a guy like Walker, who's a jitterbug, who's going to, he has a lot of runs where he runs into a pile and then somehow leaks out the back door and goes for 30 yards, or he's dancing in the backfield a little bit and is able to make something out of nothing. The concern with a guy like that is, does he also make -6 out of nothing? If you got nothing, sometimes taking nothing is the play. And Walker wasn't that guy. There aren't a whole lot of negative runs on his tape. And he does have the ability to, like you said, make his offensive line look real good. So, and the other thing about him too, even though he only had those 19 catches, which is a huge red flag, there was nothing that I saw watching him that said to me, you can't be a receiver. The hands seem okay. When he did catch a couple passes, it was certainly at least functional, but obviously the concern is if you got 2 different coaching staffs that have looked at this guy and said, we love you carrying the ball on first and second down, but you ain't touching the field on third down, for him to walk into an NFL coaching staff and for them to say, no, you're going to be fine catching the ball, obviously is a concern.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's a great way of putting it. It wasn't like, just one coaching staff was like, I don't really trust him on third down. If 2 Power 5 coaching staffs were like, I don't know if that's the best option. We have other guys who may not be as talented or as explosive with you with the ball, but I don't trust you with the ball in your hands out of the backfield. That is a red flag that I hadn't really thought of.
Now, I've seen Kenneth Walker mocked to the Bills in round 2 a couple times, like just over the last week or so. And look, I like the player, But to me, it's a curious. Now it's a little bit curious in that basically you have Duke Johnson in the Bills already. So you kind of have the guy who's maybe penciled in to be the third down back. We'll see. I mean, Devin Singletary still has those skills, and just yank him out of all third downs when he was showing an ability to be functional there last year is not a guarantee. But if you bring Walker in, you're basically saying this guy is going to do the exact same job as Devin Singletary. Zach Moss is probably, on his way out the door. And I don't know if many Bills fans will worry about that. I liked him. A whole different discussion, though. If you bring in Walker, this is saying, I think, we don't want to pay Devin Singletary next year when not only is Devin Singletary up for a contract, but so is Dawson Knox, so is Ed Oliver, so is Tremaine Edmonds. So if the Bills are going to make Walker a pick, this is a long-term pick. This is we're going to replace Zach Moss's carries this year, which may not be much anyway. And we're not going to pay Devin Singletary down the road. And I understand that because you're going to need that money for other spots on the roster. But, on its face, they're basically drafting a guy they already have. How much benefit do you think that gives to the Bills grabbing a guy like Kenneth Walker, even if it's round 2 or round 3?
See, for me, I don't remember Singletary coming out of college, but I do remember Zach Moss because we played him at Pitt. I don't think he has the same wiggle or the same backdoor ability as we alluded to earlier that Kenneth Walker has. It's just that I don't know if Kenneth Walker is the all-around complete back that maybe some of the other guys that can offer. And I'm a big fan of the Bills grabbing a running back at some point during this draft. And the reason I say that is, for one, I'm a big believer in the running game. We've talked about this a ton. I don't necessarily think that you need an upper echelon back, but there's something about a running game that is really, really conducive to high-level offenses. And I'm not talking about a Ravens or Browns or Eagles, top 2, 3, rushing attack, but just a back that, on 3rd and 3, instead of putting your $200 million quarterback as his own lead blocker, hand it off to a guy whose job is to do that, and it gets paid millions to do that. So I don't know if Kenneth Walker's that guy, so to speak, but I'm a huge fan at some point, rounds 2, 3, or 4, finding a guy that brings something different to the table in terms of the wiggle ability, elusiveness, explosiveness, something that brings a new dynamic to that Bills offense. Because I love Josh Allen. He's superhuman in a lot of regards. But how long do you want him to play? Do you want him to play 3 or 15 years? And I think that at some point it's cool to see him with the ball in his hands, taking all that punishment, but he's human just like everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I had a conversation with someone on Twitter about this the other day. You still want to see Josh Allen with the sneak play. The old Tom Brady, it's 3rd or 4th and less than 1. I'm just going to, dive forward. And I mean, Allen is a gigantous human to be able to convert that. That's fine. The thing you want to see the Bills do less of are the quarterback sweeps on 3rd and 2. And, obviously the draw is still effective, but, less called running plays that aren't just the let's get 1 yard. And I think is Walker better than Singletary at it? I think maybe. But again, there's a good discussion. The discussion here is you're spending a high pick, a day 2 pick, on preventing yourself from having to pay that position. You're not making the roster immediately better, which, and it's a weird discussion for the Bills this year because they don't really need a lot on the roster right now. The roster's good. You can use this draft to long-term. It just feels kind of wrong to take a guy like Kenneth Walker and say, yeah, look at us spend our 2nd round pick on something we already have.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I do wonder, though, would that same logic fall in the previous 2 drafts where the running back class was a little bit deeper at the top? Like, would you be comfortable with, I'm trying to think who went in the 2nd round, like a Cam Akers who came out, and I remember him at Florida State. I know that he may have looked electric in the playoffs after the Achilles tear, but I played Cam Akers at Florida State. That dude was one of one. Cam Akers or a JT who was a 2nd round guy. I'm trying to think. Joe Mixon was a 2nd round guy. Is it the running back or is it the position itself that you don't feel comfortable taking with at 57?
No. I mean, it's not either of those. It's the fact that the Bills are spending a high draft pick on something they already have. You're not making the roster better right now. I mean, it's, Kenneth Walker at best does what already Devin Singletary will give you this year. Really the only benefit to drafting a Kenneth Walker is to say we won't have to pay Devin Singletary in 2023. So essentially, we're going to spend the Bills a 2nd round pick on a running back so that we can not have to pay another running back, and maybe we can keep Tremaine Edmonds and not get worse at that position. In other words, there's really no net gain to drafting a guy like Kenneth Walker, except that, you can let Singletary walk and you don't lose something somewhere else. And it's just, I'm not saying it's even wrong, because the Bills roster is so good. If you can draft a player that keeps that roster status quo, that might still be a win. It just, you look at the draft as a place to make your team better. We've talked, the first round ideas for the Bills are, an elite wide receiver. Jamison Williams adds a new dimension, or a corner that can improve that number 2 spot for people who don't think Dane Jackson is good enough, But in this situation, we're having a discussion about a player that at best, unless he just goes crazy, exceeds expectations, is just going to keep the roster the same. And it just feels wrong, when you're doing that in round 2, even though I can, as we kind of alluded to, and I hope everybody's understanding this, where I'm going with this, it does make some sense for the Bills. So that's the only thing I'm saying. You look at, like, you go back to Breece Hall, he's not a crazy great running back, but you do see he's got breakaway speed. He's a bigger guy. He can be a receiver. This is a guy that if he hits and works out, this becomes an elite number 1 back, where you take the best of what Singletary and, a guy like Duke Johnson or a JD McKissic have to offer, and you can possibly put that all into one guy. So I can see, okay, you draft that guy, you might make the roster better. You draft Kenneth Walker, the pie in the sky scenario is just keeping the roster the same. I'm not saying the Bills shouldn't do it, or I'd even criticize it, but I just don't know if there's much of a ceiling or an upside with that pick.
I see that, and knowing that some of how the corners will shake out, and I believe there'll be some at round 2. I think there'll be certain value at different positions in the back half of round 2, where as opposed you might be reaching, I don't want to say reaching, but getting Kenneth Walker in the back half. So I do agree in that the Bills will have other needs or other places where they can upgrade their roster at corner, or as we all know, there's going to be a receiver that's pretty darn good at the back half of round 2 if you don't get one in round 1. Yeah. So I do agree with to that extent, where in the back half of round 1, you can still make the team better as opposed to staying the status quo by grabbing another position of need.
Let's not talk about Isaiah Spiller quick, the A&M back. I'm not a huge fan of this guy, and I know he's kind of the third member of the top 3 in this group. I think the guys who kind of separated themselves. Only a 4.6 40, so he's not a home run guy at all. Does a good job making a man miss, has some burst, decent hands of receiver. This kind of guy, like, you look at him, you're like, that's okay. That trait's okay. Oh, he's okay there. He's not bad. But the funny thing about Spiller, the best attribute he has to offer is that all of these meh to good qualities, you see him every week doing it in the SEC, which is basically as close to the NFL as you'll get. If you would tell me that the guy I saw on film is going to be transferred to the NFL as is, with no decline in production because the competition around you get better, well, then I'd be on board with Isaiah Spiller. But it's hard for any of these college guys for you to get there. So that's kind of what leaves me. This to me is a guy I don't want to touch. I don't want him in round 1 for sure. I don't want him in round 2. And I really don't want to have to draft him in round 3 either. He might last that long. I wouldn't be surprised if he's still on the board at like pick 90, but I really don't want him at all. I don't think he's got anything dynamic to where I'm excited about him as a pick. If you want to, pick him in like round 4 to where most of those guys become lottery picks, sure. But Spiller did really, really little that impressed me in terms of traits that are going to be dominant at the next level.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I was researching for this what we're doing right now, and there were some people who had Spiller as RB1, and I'm like, okay, let me watch some more games and see what I'm missing here, because clearly I'm in the same boat as you, where I don't really see anything that stands out to where I'm like, oh, we got to go get him. And I just don't see any transferable traits that are like, wow, this is a guy that I have to go get. As we talked about earlier, if I'm going to get a guy in rounds 1, 2, and 3, I'm assuming you're a starter for my team. And so basically I'm saying you're going to be better than Devin Singletary. I don't know if there's anything that he does that's so elite that I have to get get him on my roster. So when I'm thinking about previous drafts where I would be comfortable taking a running back in round 1, 2, or 3, I thought he has legit track speed. Like Jonathan Taylor has legit track speed, plus he's a bruiser. So I mean, that's a trait that you must get that, right? I thought that although Clyde Edwards-Helaire hasn't really succeeded to the league, you saw his pass catching ability and you saw, okay, wow, that's a trait that maybe could be better in the league. I don't know where Isaiah Spiller's elite trait where I have to get that on my roster where no one else in the league can get it. And like you can't get it nowhere else in the league. So I think he's fine, solid. But once again, if I'm going rounds 1, 2, or 3, you need to be that much better than the starter ahead of you, so you can just take his spot, or B, upgrade the team and fill a need. And I don't really see him doing either or.
All right, let's move on to I want to talk about guards and centers real quick. This is a need the Bills could have. Certainly guard is something that was talked about a lot before they signed Roger Saffold and before they matched the contract on Ryan Bates. I think there's still certainly the possibility they draft a guard, because I think the Bills are going to primarily use this draft to address needs down the road, needs beyond, 2022. Although Ryan Bates is under contract for 4 years, Roger Saffold is not, so they may have a need at guard beyond this year. And there are some guys who are available. I don't know if I'd go round 1, but Carl, I want to make a case for one round 1 pick. All right.
I'm listening.
I think the Bills in round 1 are probably going to go wide receiver or corner, depending on who's available. I think Andrew Booth very likely will be there. You got a bunch of receivers you can make an argument for. I think Traylon Burks is a generally safe bet that could be there. I'd even be fine with Sky Moore in round 1. Tyler Linderbaum, the center from Iowa, I think can be a very reasonable, if not good, first round pick for the Bills. Now, look, he's a great center on film. I mean, people have talked about him going back to January as a high level pick. I saw him as a top 10 pick, early in the draft process. Most people got him, either late round 1, early round 2 right now. When you watch him on film, he was better than I expected. I'm like, well, Jesus, this guy's top 10. He's got to be phenomenal. His technique is so good. He uses his hands so well. He always gets low. He always gets his hands on the other player first. And he just does everything right. The big knock on him at the NFL level is he played at 290 in college. Okay. 290 might as well be a linebacker in the NFL right now. Certainly maybe an edge rusher, so you're not doing that at center. Now he has put on some weight. I read somewhere recently he's gotten up over 300 pounds. The thing is though, he's probably only a center in the NFL. So that's a big check mark against for the Bills making him a draft pick. But when you start looking at next year, and again, this draft is about the future, not this season. The Bills have, like we said, those 4 guys who are not under contract: Tremaine Edmunds, Ed Oliver, Dawson Knox, Devin Singletary. You want to keep at least some of those guys, all right? You got to find money for them somewhere. Well, there's not a whole lot of guys. You look at next year's cap, there's not a whole lot of guys that the Bills can easily cut and create that cap space. One of the guys who would make sense is Mitch Morse. So you draft a center this year in Tyler Linderbaum. You play him, you let him, almost as a redshirt season. He's an understudy. He learns. He's ready to go next year, and you save that Mitch Morse money so that you can pay Singletary if you want, or more likely Edmonds and Oliver and Knox, or at least 2 of those 3. Here's the other reason why I like Linderbaum as a pick. You start thinking about the Bills roster this year. Where are my injury concerns? All right, who are the guys that I'd be worried about? This guy got hurt. It might derail a season. Obviously, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Trey White's already hurt. All right. Beyond that, though, Mitch Morse to me has got to be at least in a top 5 injury concern situation for the Bills. This is a guy that's had 5 concussions in his career. If he gets hurt, your best backup center is probably Ryan Bates. So now you're talking about, blowing up the whole offensive line. Theoretically, you're going to move a guard to center, bring in somebody new at guard. If you put Linderbaum on this team, now you're covered at center. If any problem happens with Morse, you got a guy that can step in there that's an elite talent that everyone thinks can, function at the NFL right away. Yeah, he might need to put on weight, whatever. At least you have a really high level backup for a guy that to me has got to be a primary injury concern. So you think about the benefit he could have in 23 and beyond, the fact that, this is a guy that some people thought was a top 10 talent. You're going to get him at 25, and you cover one of your most important positions, and probably the position where you have the least coverage for right this second. So to me, you start thinking about all this. I'm not taking Linderbaum over a Crystal Olave or a really good corner, but if those guys are not available, I really think the Bills should consider Linderbaum at pick 25.
And you just might have sold me on that being an idea for the Bills at 25. No, you talked about like what he brings to the table, and you're right in all that regards. I understand that he is undersized, so that might limit him playing guard. But being from Cleveland, growing up and watching Jason Kelce's career going from Cincinnati to the Eagles, Jason Kelce is the exact same size as Tyler Linderbaum. And Jason Kelce's been an all-pro, Pro Bowl talent. So I get it that he's an outlier, but there's a pathway to Tyler Linderbaum being a really darn good pro. So I understand that there are concerns about his size, but he uses his hands really well. He has a wrestling background, so he clearly knows how to use his balance and his leverage in that regard. For the Bills in that regard, would you be okay sitting in that room and you're close to a Super Bowl, you're trying to go all in, and this is the year that you're trying to go in? Would you be comfortable letting that guy sit on your bench, knowing that he probably can't contribute at only one position? Would you be comfortable knowing that he's a next year guy if you're going all in for this year, is what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, here's the thing. The guy you drafted in the first round last year was not a guy who really contributed that much. I mean, what did Greg Rousseau do for that team last year? You know, he had 4 sacks. I mean, he had like one of them after September. Nice run defender, you know, but I mean, you could have got that anywhere, you know, off a free agent, you know, a guy off the street who's been a veteran in the NFL. I mean, Shaq Lawson can be that guy. So it's not like the Bills at 30 got somebody who was this crazy contributor. Now, to be fair, you know, that team last year didn't go to the Super Bowl. They were probably this close to getting the AFC Championship game, would have had a good chance, blah, 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 blah. The point is that I don't think you can look at 25 and expect that guy to be a contributor. I mean, look, if they take Andrew Booth at 25, there's no guarantee he beats out Dane Jackson and can't be the number 2 corner if Trey White is healthy. You know, if they take Daxton Hill, I mean, he's probably a sub guy, you know, a guy you can plug and play in different places. Yeah, he's going to be able to contribute for sure. But you know, and again, I'm not taking Linderbaum over anybody in round number 1. I'm taking Linderbaum if my Booths and my receivers and my other options who I think can contribute, who I'm more excited about, are not there. You know, I think the point I'm trying to make is that Linderbaum, I think, is a legitimate option if the draft doesn't fall your way, and can be very beneficial in multiple ways. You know, but again, you know, Carl, they spent money and a draft pick to get Case Keenum, right? They, you know, spent to making an effort, we think, to bolster the wide receiver core. You know, this offense is the fastball, and if you want to derail it in a hurry, you know, losing your center is a guy. I mean, think about a tackle. They had Deion Dawkins and Darrell Williams. They spent 2 draft picks at tackle last year, not first round picks, but 2 draft picks. So they're the most important offensive positions. They're really covered, except for center. So I can sit in that room. If the draft doesn't fall my way, I can make that argument to get Linderbaum.
I mean, as you alluded to earlier, it's not for a lack of talent as to why he would be there at 25. I mean, yeah. when it comes to what he brings to the table, like compared it to other players in this draft, he's a top 10 guy. I mean, when it comes to, you know, his skill set and all the other things that he brings to the table, he's angry. You see a couple of plays on film where he's just out there just being an offensive lineman, you know, taking things too far. But I love that about him. And it would just be, could you sell, like if the draft board fell a certain way, and if, I don't know, if Sky Moore or Burks or an Olave were still there, it would be really hard to take Linderbaum over them. But as you alluded to, you wouldn't do that in the first place. So
yeah, well I mean, over Olave, no. Over Sky Moore, I might take him over Sky Moore. You know, and I love Sky Moore. I'm a huge Sky Moore fan. Or even, you know, Christian Watson. I could see that being the argument for, all right, the draft falls wrong. Let's take wide receiver 8, you know, because so many guys went in front of us. And, you know, all those teams between 15 and 25, there could be a lot of receivers that go. So I get all that. But you know, I would go Linderbaum. If I'm sitting in that room, I think I'd go Linderbaum over Sky Moore and Watson, just because both those guys have big time small school questions to where, yeah, you're not going to put him on your bench, but I don't know if he's going to contribute. You know, is Sky Moore going to be in year 1 better than Gabriel Davis or Isaiah McKenzie? I mean, I hope so, but I'm not sure. Tyler Linderbaum, you know, I feel really confident as a guy that can work, you know, year 2, year 3 down the road. So look, it's a great discussion. Don't get me wrong. Like if I'm sitting there and it's Linderbaum or Sky Moore, I'm feeling like I'm good either way. I think I might lean Linderbaum a little bit over Sky Moore. All right.
I had one more thing to add to that.
Yeah.
I guess if you're talking about Sky Moore or Christian Watson or someone who may not be ready day 1, I mean, they're not going to contribute year 1 anyways, and Tyler Linderbaum won't be on the field because of Mitch Morris. Why not take the guy who you know for a fact year 2 will be that legit guy, at worst be a really good starter. So yeah, I do see that shaking out the way you just said, for sure.
And I mean, this is a Super Bowl or bust year. You know, I mean, if you're sitting there and you could have covered up position, you know, with a guy that can benefit you long term in multiple ways, you or you just take your fourth receiver or your third receiver that at that point, doesn't have the elite talent you might have been hoping would have been available at 25. That's where Linderbaum becomes, the good argument.
Sure.
Guard, in terms of other guards, the two guys I think at the top of the class, guard wise, are Zion Johnson and Kenyon Green. Zion from BC and Green from A&M. Now, the funny thing for me watching these two guys, Green looks like the more athletic player on film. Like Zion Johnson is the prototypical dancing bear. Like, he's athletic and can move, but it almost looks like it's not super comfortable for him. He does a lot of things real well, and so does Green. But the funny thing is, Zion tested way better. Short shuttle, 40. All the combine measurements, Zion was significantly better than Kenyon Green, which was, fascinating. I think either guy can be a reasonable, round 2 pick, not round 1. I don't know if either one's going to even be there round 2. I think I like Green a little bit more than Zion. One concern I had for Zion, and it almost feels, a little weird to bring it up, but there were multiple plays I saw where at BC, they would get rushed with 3. And a lot of times when there's a 3-man rush, it's the center and the 2 tackles that handle it, and the guards are kind of there to help. Zion wouldn't just stand around. He'd stand there, patrolling for pressure that was never going to come. Whereas Kenyon Green would go out and find some work. When you hear the term offensive lineman that go find work, that's a lot of the situation when it happens. Green would do it. Green would go out and, knock a guy over, help his tackle out. Where Zion, I'm like, what are you doing, dude? There's nothing happening here. It's a 3-man rush. There's no one coming. You waiting for that late blitzing linebacker from 10 yards down the field. Go help your tackle out. It's a really small criticism on a unique situation. But it was something that bothered me. Either way, I think both these two guys are going to be solid NFL guards and would be reasonable day 2 picks. Look, no one's putting them on a program cover to sell the fans on next season, but these are the kind of guys you got to hit on to keep your program going in the right direction.
Yeah, 100%. When you talk about Kenyon Green and, his athleticism, he played all over the O-line at A&M. So clearly, I don't know if you want him playing at tackle, but in a situation where the Bills got into last year where there was COVID issues, injury issues on a week-to-week basis, Kenyon Green has showed the capability to be able to bump out to tackle in an emergency basis. So that was encouraging to see. Actually, Zion Johnson, he played at BC. So I wanted to ask one of my friends Josh Black, is in the draft this year. And I wanted to ask him about playing against him because I said that Zion Johnson looks like an angry guy at the line of scrimmage. It's hard to move him. And so I asked, what was it like playing against him? And he said, quote, "He's a dog. I always hated playing against him. He was super strong at the point of attack. I just don't know how he is in space." And I think that's two things. One, the way BC runs their offense, they don't really ask much of their guards to go out in space in the screen game and wide zone. So he might have the capability, he just didn't show it. But I do think Kenyon Green, in terms of what he's shown on film, could move a little better in terms of getting up to the next level and getting out to the screens. But he said that Zion Johnson was an angry SOB at the point of attack, and he was hard to move. He said in a stalemate, he said that would be a win for him. So he said he's a really strong dude. And although I think that's really can be said for about both players, I think both are really strong at the point of attack in terms of just moving a guy from point A to point B. So like you just alluded to earlier, though, I think the Bills in terms of round 1, I think receiver or corner would be, or Linderbaum will be best. Don't know if those guys are first round guys though.
Yeah, I tell you what. Now BC did run a lot of wide zone. That was pretty much the games I watched. That was essentially their entire running game, and I thought he functioned pretty well. Zion did in it. And then one of the things I liked about him too is he doesn't get out of control a lot. He really able to move his body where it needs to go without lunging or getting away. So the fact that Josh is saying that he's also a dog and a pain in the neck in a phone booth, that probably knocks my Zion thoughts up a notch or two. Because I thought he moved pretty solidly. I'm actually curious why, I'd like to talk to Josh about it too. I didn't see the BC Syracuse game, so maybe that's a unique situation, but look, again, both these guys are pretty solid. And I think would be reasonable picks for the Bills on round number 2. I want to go back to running back real quick. I think when we were talking yesterday, you said something about a guy kind of off the top 3 beaten path that you were a fan of, maybe deeper in the draft for the Bills.
Oh yeah, 100%. You want to talk about something that will bring someone who will bring something different to the Bills offense that they just don't have right now. And I guess you can maybe say Isaiah McKenzie, but I don't think he brings it to the certain extent that this kid does. James Cook out of Georgia. Dalvin Cook's little brother. Now, don't get it twisted. He doesn't play anything like his brother. He's not nearly as thick or as powerful between the tackles, or it's just flat out the running back that his brother is, okay? But in terms of being a receiver out of the backfield and being explosive with the ball in his hands, that is what he does, and he does it at an elite level. I don't mean good level. I mean an elite level. And the reason why I like him a ton is, for one, he doesn't have any tread on his tires. I mean, playing at Georgia, it was a rotation over there. He has Zamir White and a bunch of other litany of 5-stars that rotated in, so he doesn't have a lot of tread on his tires in that regard. But he lined up everywhere for that Georgia offense that isn't really too dynamic. If you've ever watched a Georgia game, they're I formation, ground and pound, so there's not really much creativity. But the one guy they were creative with was James Cook. He lined up at X sometimes. He lined up at slot sometimes. He lined up in the backfield, and they pitched it out to him. I don't think he's a round 1, 2, or 3 type of guy, because he's not going to play on first or second down. But in terms of a guy who you can line up in the slot, you can line up out wide if you want to, and if you line up in the backfield and just do creative stuff with him, I think he's a really, really interesting idea, because no matter how good your linebacker is, he's not the athlete that James Cook is in space. You want to go back and watch that Michigan game. You want to go back and watch the SEC championship game against Alabama. Neither of those teams could rock with him in space. Now, granted, he's not going to get the same amount of touches that all these other running backs are going to get, because he's at Georgia. And he's not playing the first and 2 downs, because Georgia also had a really good back in Zamir White, who's in the draft this year. And Georgia's offense just isn't conducive to, force feed one guy the ball. But he has a niche, and that niche is really, really coveted in the NFL today. You want to talk about guys like a J.D. McKissic, who the Bills wanted a ton, right? In terms of his pass catching capabilities. I think James Cook is that guy who later on in the draft brings that at an elite level.
Does it make sense for the Bills, Carl, after they signed Duke Johnson, to where you kind of already have that guy? I mean, again, we talked about this draft is about the future for the Bills, not necessarily this year. But does James Cook, do you think, still make sense, considering that, literally that guy is theoretically on the roster already?
I don't think Duke Johnson does the same things that Cook does. I'm not going to trust Duke Johnson out wide. I think Duke Johnson may be better in pass pro right now, for sure. So he might be able to find his way on the field a lot sooner than James Cook would, because I think there is a huge question mark. You got to be able to pass pro in today's league, and I don't think he's really offered that, already shown that on film at this point. But he doesn't offer the same versatility that Cook offers in that regard. I do think Duke Johnson is a hell of a pass catcher. I mean, that's his calling card. That's why he's making the big breads now. I just don't think he brings it to the same extent in terms of explosiveness, suddenness, and his ability to get to 0 to 100 as a James Cook. And granted, I know that the Bills have signed a bunch of players, and obviously this. The roster won't. Some veterans will get cut off this team. Some players that we did bring in, or some guys that you had in the 2 deep that won't be on the roster for a litany of reasons. I think a guy like that could push someone out of Buffalo.
All right, man. I'm watching James Cook right now. I could definitely see the allure. I mean, he has, there is a little J.D. McKissic, Duke Johnson in his game, at least what I'm watching right now. So that'll be a fun thing to watch on Saturday if he is available for the Bills. Yeah. All right. I think we're all set with running backs and interior linemen. We're going to hopefully continue this next week as the draft gets closer, talk some more about what the Bills should do and a few other prospects we like in the draft. Carl, thanks for being on again today. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you missed this, it'll be on my Twitter feed later today, probably in just a few minutes. And then we will also have it on the News 8 website at rochesterfirst.com. Thanks for everybody for tuning in, and we'll talk to you later.